Hey, my name's Logan Maddox. So I've grown up in the South for my entire life. Lived in one city in East Tennessee called Knoxville. And what I've begun to notice is that while in the South, while we have an abundance of Bible trivia, we have almost zero Bible application, how to take what's in this book and apply it to our life. So today I'm going to hop right into how to engage people with Christ. Now, I want to be a little bit open about how I've done this. And to me, looking at my past, I feel like I've done this poorly. God's brought opportunities to me, and I've just been too scared to engage with people. But what that's taught me is to not be scared. Because at the end of the day, if you believe the gospel, if you believe that Jesus died to save you, then you have the power and the cure for this world. You have what the entire world is searching for. From the richest man to the poorest man, they're all searching for Jesus. And once you begin to believe that, once you begin to get to that point, like, all you want to do is share that. And I really had struggles doing that, but what God's taught me is, like, I just need to be sharing more, because the more I share, the bigger my faith builds. So what I would encourage you to do is to not be afraid and to start seeing how Jesus engages people with the good news, with the gospel, with hope. So in John chapter 4, we see Jesus going to Samaria. Now, I'll give you a little bit of Bible context. I'll put up a map here. So Samaria is above Jerusalem, and the Samaritans believed that they were worshiping God the right way, and the Jews believed they were worshiping the God the right way. So there was a lot of conflict between the two groups. It was so much conflict that Jews didn't even enter into Samaria. They would avoid Samaria. They would walk around Samaria. And it took miles. It's like if you were traveling across the United States from New York to LA, but you went through Canada. Like, it's going way around to avoid something. So instead of Jesus avoiding what most people would avoid, what I would have probably avoided too, he walked straight into it. So just before we even start the story, I want you to think about that thing in your life. Maybe it's where you go to school, or where you go to work, or who you hang out with. Imagine you know those people who are the Samaritans. You know who they are in your life. And I know who I'm scared to talk to and who I'm scared to engage with. But just knowing that God has gone before me and he's already done this. Something that I firmly believe is that God would never ask you to do something that he's not willing to do himself. God would never ask you to carry your cross if he's not willing to pick up his own. And so God does that. Jesus does that. He walks into Samaria and he goes up to a woman and he starts talking with her. He starts engaging with her. And the first thing that he says to this woman is, "Will you give me a drink?" I think commonly when we try to engage people with the gospel, we go up to them and we're like, boom, Jesus. And it's like, accept it now, come to church, bring them. And we're trying to hit them. But he's just asking for a simple drink. He's just trying to start a conversation. It's like if I went up to someone and was like, hey, I like your outfit. It's like me just trying to engage with them, not me trying to shove the gospel or shove God down their throat. So already you can see, though, by the second question, by the first thing that she asked was, in John chapter 9, the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. So you can already see her pushing back against him. Even with something as simple as, "Will you give me a drink?" Even something as simple as that, she's already pushing back against him. And I think that's such a great testimony of how we should look, how we should appear to people. Imagine if you walked up to someone and just by asking them a simple question, they could see God in you. And some people are going to accept that with open arms because they know deep down that's what they've been searching for, but other people are going to really push back against that. And you see that with Jesus. He just asked, "Will you give me a drink?" And this woman's already like, "Oh my gosh, get away from me." But I think his response is extraordinarily interesting. And he said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given it to you." So this is kind of funny. Jesus is referring to himself in third person, but he's also not referring to himself in third person. Because the Trinity, so it's God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus, He's referring to he, so he could have been referring to one of them. But that's kind of beside the point. He's saying that if you knew God, you know what you want. He's talking to this woman in just straight up terms. You come to this well every day to draw water, but you don't really know why you're coming here. And she came by herself, which is interesting because most Samaritan women would come with a group. So Jesus already knows that this woman is an outcast of society. And Jesus knows who she is, but that's how we can start to see before we start to read on as we get those context clues of she's coming by herself to this well. So she obviously doesn't have any friends to come with. So Jesus said, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for a drink instead of me asking you. So I want to challenge you, look at your life. When was the last time you asked God for a drink? Or to put it in more simple terms, when did you ask God to fulfill you? So often we see ourselves praying for just stuff. You know, God, I really want this car, or I really need this money, or whatever. But how often are you asking God to fulfill you? How often are we seeking God's plan for our life? We're coming to a well, but we're only drawing water for ourselves. So the woman, she's kind of starting to learn that this guy's different. She's seeing how he's different. So in verse 11 it says, "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw water with. The well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well?" So it goes on to talk about Jacob, but the main point is look at yourself, look at myself, and how I see myself in that. It's so often, you know, God's reaching out towards us, but we're looking at anything to keep him from getting towards us. So she sarcastically almost says, well, you don't have anything to drink from, when he's not even talking about physical water. So I challenge you to look in your life and see what you're limiting, how you're limiting God. So anyways, Jesus goes on to talk to her, and he's talking to her about how he can fulfill her. And what I think is where the story starts to turn is in verse 16. That's what I really see the story as. You know, Jesus went up, he asked her a simple question to start engaging with her the gospel. She could already see how he was different, and she already started to push back against that. He explained to her how he could fulfill her, and then he shifts the conversation. In verse 16 he says, he told her, "Go tell your husband and come back." So commonly in this culture she would be married by this point. And Jesus, he knows that she's not married, but he's challenging her. He's challenging her darkness inside of her. He's challenging her struggle. God is challenging your struggle today, and he's challenging the people's struggles around you, and he's going to use you to challenge people's struggles. If God didn't want you here anymore, he'd kill you. God has a plan for your life that's beyond my dreams and beyond your dreams. And that plan starts with go tell your husband and come back. So read it like this: go get your problem and come back to Jesus. And why I say to read it like that is in verse 17 she replied, "I have no husband." And I see myself in that so deeply, of I have no husband. And here's why. Because he said to her, go get your problem and bring it back to me so I can fix your problem for you. But I look at what my problem is and I say that doesn't exist. Jesus knew she had a problem, and how I know she knew he had a problem is because he said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is that you have had 5 husbands, and the man you are now with is not your husband. What you have said is quite. So he comes back with a comment of, I know that you have a problem. I know your problem. But I still want you to bring that problem to me. I still want to work with you to go through that problem with me. So I still want to work with you to go through that problem, but then she shifts. See, God comes to you, he says, go get your problems, you bring them back to me. We go look at our problems and don't get sucked back into that sin, but know that it's there. Don't get sucked back into that darkness, but see it and bring it back to Him. I do it so often where I go to my husband, not in that way, but I see it so often as I go to my problem, but then I stop because I get drawn back in to my problem. What I'm failing to do is I go back to my problem, but I forget the bring it back to me part. I forget the bring it to God part, which is the most vital part of that whole thing. If you're going back to your sin, but you're never bringing it back to God, going back to your sin is the worst thing that you could do. So you're not fixing the problem. You're just getting drawn back into that. See, but when God engages with me, what I commonly do is try to run away from that. And this is exactly what that woman does. She says, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place that we must worship is in Jerusalem. How are you changing the subject on God? Whenever God really starts to push at you and show you in your life, this is your problem. This is where your sin's hidden you. This is where your struggle is. And you can see that. You can see, that is my struggle. That's where I'm hurting the most. But whenever I get to that, I just run away. I turn my back and I skirt on out of there. So that's what she's doing. And she's done that multiple times now. See, but so often when we go to our problem, when we go find our problem, we literally run the other way. We stop and we go, God, I'm changing the subject on you. And that's what she does in verse 25. She says, I know the Messiah, called the Christ, is coming. When He comes, He will explain everything to us. She's standing with Him. God is standing in front of you. God stands in front of me all the time. And I go, I know when God comes back, He's just going to make everything perfect. That's so just blatantly wrong. We study Revelation, but we don't study how to live before that happens. Jesus said, then Jesus declared, I am the one speaking to you. I am He. This is so powerful to me. Because whenever I change the subject on God, whenever I say, it'll be better tomorrow, I'll get closer to God when I get older. I'll be really strong with God when I'm older. I'll have a lot of wisdom in that. But that's not God. That's not what God's calling you to. That's not what God's calling me to. He's not calling me to be closer with Him tomorrow. He's calling me to be closer with Him today. I am the one you're speaking to. I am He. So look at that, and then you can see. So here's how engaging with someone works. You start engaging with them. You start loving them as a person. You just ask them for a drink. You ask them to just sit down and drink with them or be with them, right? And you start engaging with them in that, and you start loving with them through that process. But then you show them who God is. You point them to where their problem is. You show them. You ask them about their husband. As you ask them about their problem. And whenever they turn that situation on them, you show them how God loves them today in their problem. How He is the God of their problem. And whenever we do that, whenever we engage with someone like that, that's when we see change happen. And that's how she changed. Right after He said, I am the one, she went and returned to Samaria. She returned to her husband. She returned to her problem, and she brought it back to Jesus. And through that process of bringing back to Jesus, she changed Samaria. Samaria was changed through the outcast. And I just want to challenge you today, how are you changing people? I heard this the other day. It was turn your mess into your message. That's the gospel explained in like 3 words. And someone said that to me that was an atheist. He wasn't even a Christian. He wasn't even talking about Jesus. But it was so blatantly obvious of that's what it applies to. She took her mess, and through Jesus, she used that mess as her message. She went back and said, I met the man who told me everything that I ever did. And that's how Samaria was reached. That's how your problem will be reached. Stephen Furtick said, what you might be calling a problem, God might be calling a harvest. And the harvest is commonly thought of as just something easy. But the harvest is the hardest time that a farmer works. So I challenge you today to find those people in your life that you've been loving on, that you've been showing the love of Christ to. And I challenge you to start telling them. I was a Christian for years before I ever told anyone about Jesus, which is so unbiblical, which is so un-Christ-like of me to do, and so selfish. I have the cure for every problem that they have. But I'm just holding that in because I'm scared of what? Being judged a little bit. So I challenge you to go ask someone, can I have a drink? And to start that process of seeing them as a person and showing them the love of Christ. So for more on how to live with Christ in your daily life, just come back next week. I'll have another video up right here. Thanks for watching. That was fun. It was a lot of fun.